I'd like to start. My name is Michelle Land. I'm the president of NJTESOL-NJBE. And thank you all for joining us today. We're so excited that
NJPMDHL
are able to join us here. If you have your microphone unmuted, please mute it at this time. Thank you. So this presentation will be going for about 90 minutes. We're planning on about an hour, give or take, for the presentation, and then we'll try and do some questions and answers at the end. If you have a very important, relevant question as the presentation is going on, please feel free to put it in the chat, and we will try to answer them as we go. So excited to welcome Julie and Joanne here. They are two of the co-authors of the NJPSA document, which is the title of this presentation as well, which is called Guidance for Intervention and Evaluations and Delivery of Special Education for Multilingual Learners. This is a question that we get all the time on the hot list. Any of you who have worked within this field, I'm sure that you have had this issue where you see a student who's struggling and you're not sure, is it language issues or is it a learning issue? And so this guidance will hopefully help us to understand better how to support our students. So without further ado, thank you so much, Julie and Joanne, and I'll let you take it away.
Thank you so much for having us. We are excited to share with everyone some information and to talk about this publication that came out of NJPSA, but we just want to make sure that everybody gets onto the Pear Deck. If you haven't, go to joinpd.com and enter the 6 letters on the screen. If you get booted out of Pear Deck, the 6 letters will always appear on the top right-hand corner of the screen. And maybe, Kathy, if you're able to type that code in for people as people are coming in, maybe the directions to go to joinpd.com and enter these 6 letters, then that way, as people join us, they'll be able to access the slides. You will also get a bit.ly address at the very end, so you can have access to the slides once the Pear Deck goes away. Once we end it, you won't have access to the slides, but we want to make sure you have them. So we will give you a bit.ly at the end. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start. And once again, those 6 letters will be on the top right-hand corner. So welcome. We are very excited to spend a little bit of time with all of you, and thank you so much for spending some time with us at a time that is so incredibly busy for all of us. December is crazy.
When is it not busy? You know what, I'm starting to think that's all a hoax, that whole like next week or next month, it's going to be so much easier, right?
Exactly. So we'd like to take just a moment to introduce ourselves. My name is Julie Ochoa. I'm co-owner of Yamame, a company that Joanne and I own and bought from Barbara Tedesco and BJ Franks. I recently retired July 1 of 2024 from my position in Franklin Township as the supervisor of ESL and bilingual teachers there and bilingual programs. And I see a couple of faces from Franklin. Welcome, everybody. It's good to see you guys. I also teach a course at Rutgers called Teaching the Emerging Bilinguals, which is a course requirement for everybody going through the Graduate School of Education getting a certificate, a teaching certificate. So no matter what content area, if they're getting physics or biology or dance certificate, it is a course that is required for them to take. So I'm so excited to also tell you that between Joanna and I, we had what the state calls model programs, meaning that they were recognized by the state. Our programs were very different, but it just shows that there's many different ways of meeting the needs of multilingual learners, and by no means were they perfect. But we did a lot of good things for our multilingual learners. So that's a little bit about who I am. I'll let Joanne tell you a little bit about her background.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Joanna Grin, and I retired at the same time as Julie in the end of June of 24 from the Vineland School District all the way down in Cumberland County. As Julie mentioned, it was also a model ESL bilingual program. And in my spare time from doing that, I was supervisor there of ESL, bilingual education, world languages, and performing arts. And when I wasn't doing those things, I was past president of this organization, NJTESOL-NJBE. I ran the conference. I did all of those things that other folks are doing now. And also for 8 years before I retired, I was chair of the New Jersey Principal and Supervisors Association's Multilingual Learners Leadership Committee because we need those folks to be on board as well. So that's a little bit about us. And here is what I like to call really appropriately the close on a Zoom slide, because if you had the pleasure of teaching during the pandemic, about a week or so in, all of a sudden we started getting all these rules about what to do, what not to do, what to wear, and what not to wear, because somebody somewhere out there violated a norm, and then we all had to have rules. And for the record, it was not me. So this is just to say that, we'll keep our microphones muted unless we need to unmute them. We'll do all the things that we already know that we need to do during a normal Zoom meeting.
And I'm just having trouble advancing the slides, but here we are. So what are we going to talk about today? First, we're going to talk a little bit about context, like how did this document come about? We're going to address some of the content in this document through some case studies and some scenarios. And we are also going to talk a little bit about collaboration. And at the very end, well, not at the very end, but throughout the presentation, we will be talking and giving you lots of resources. And just so you know, to join the Pear Deck, you need to go to joinpd.com and not the bit.ly. So you need to go joinpd.com and enter those 3 letters. All right, in case you haven't accessed the Pear Deck. So let's start with the very beginning. What happened? What are the recurring issues?
And I love this one. I love that particular illustration because it really does speak to the fact that our perspective, right, where we're coming from, kind of informs what we think the issues are. So let's advance to the next one. And talk about what some of the barriers are to collaboration. And one of them is structural. We have 2 different sets of code. They were developed separately at different times, and they were not developed in consultation with one another. So you have these 2 kind of silos, but we have a lot of kids that live in the middle. And speaking of silos, there's a lot of knowledge barriers, right? There aren't that many people out there that really, really understand both fields and how they intersect, and how that manifests itself in our students. So that's another issue. And then also we have local barriers. We have a lack of collaboration among departments. Sometimes it's a little bit of a zero-sum game where, we feel like if one department wins something, the other one loses something. And then sometimes deficit-based views and cultures, right? We're looking at our students and, by extension, sometimes looking at some of our staff as being sort of less than, right? And so we want to address those things as well.
Exactly.
And so this was something that was done. Julie and I are co-authors, but we're not the only co-authors of this. This was a group effort between the ML committee and the special ed committee at NJPSA. And so it really all just started with a question on, we have sort of our version of the hot list. And it was a question about, when do you need a bilingual aid? And things kind of snowballed from there. And then we got the other committee pulled into this. And 2 years later, this document was born. And we're actually in the middle of a revision of it, because even though this is from late 2023, a lot has happened with respect to AI and other issues. So we should have another version of this out by conference time that we'll be telling you all about at that point and what the changes are. but there were a few things we felt we needed to address, and so that was what we did. And one of the things we always say is that sometimes bad decisions get made with the best of intentions and incomplete knowledge. There's nobody out there who wakes up in the morning and just says, "Oh, what a beautiful day. I can't wait to hurt some kids." Right? We just don't do that. There are easier ways to earn money than doing what we do. But sometimes we make bad decisions because we just don't know everything. And that's why we work in teams.
Exactly. And in order to access, if you'd like to access the document that we're talking about, on your Pear Deck slide, you see that image of the document. If you click on it, it is linked, so it should take you right to the document. So please go ahead and click right on that image, and it will get you to the document. We are going to be referencing it as we talk tonight. But the very first thing we'd like to do is find out from you what you are thinking about. What are your questions? What are you hoping that we talk about tonight in the time that we do have together regarding multilingual learners, and those multilingual learners who might need additional support or who might have a learning disability? So in your Pear Decks, you should have like a speech bubble or place to type. So we're going to give you a couple of moments to type those questions. What are you wondering about? What are you hoping we answer tonight? And then I will show those questions that you type in just a few moments. So take a couple of minutes and just type your questions. If you've just joined us, please go to joinpd.com and enter the 6 letters on the top right-hand corner of the screen, GPMDHL, and that will give you access to the Pear Deck.
Let's see, how can we learn if an ML is learning disabled if they struggle with subjects, specifically math? Classroom collaboration? How can we tell if it's a language barrier or a learning disability? Supporting long-term MLs in an ESL program who may have a learning disability, may or may not be classified.
Good question. Some ML students may not qualify for special education because of gaps in their education. So we're going to talk about that, right?
Mhm.
And
It's like you're reading our minds.
yes, how can I get a better understanding of my students' English language proficiency if they're communication impaired? Great question. Mm. Middle schooler who cannot decode, what's the best way to teach them to decode? Right, not a reading specialist. That's a very specific question, and there's lots of programs out there. This is not specifically something we were going to talk about, but I know that there are some, programs like Orton Gillingham, right, that are used with students even at upper grades who are not able to decode, who need to learn their letters and sounds.
Oh, I love this one. How do you advocate for yourself within the CST and IEP team when you're regularly not invited to meetings or
Aha,
asked for any input in evaluation and IEP creation, even after several reminders and requests to be part of them?
I
We are
love
going there for sure.
absolutely. Are all of these things supposed to be in the IEPs? We're going to talk about that. How do you know if it's a language or disability? What's
Use of
the
data.
data? We are definitely going to talk about data. Absolutely. How do you ML teachers gain more knowledge about working with special needs students? These are great questions, and we are definitely going to address a lot of these entitled to others.
Oh, yeah, this one here about students having to have a certain score to be eligible for intervention.
Good question. And we have a story to tell you about that. Language barrier, best methods for diagnosing. How can I decipher between a life student and a learning disabled? We were talk about that.
Mhm.
meet our learning disabled students. A
How
lot
do
of
we address when they dismiss our students and say it's a language barrier? Oh, yeah, that happens.
yes, 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 yes. Better ways to assist, differentiate between lack of English versus language disorder. Discuss what a language.
Information about preschool MLs.
Yes, we're going to talk about that. All right, I think we are on the same page. So let's get started and trying to answer some of these questions because
And if at the end we are going to have a little survey, and if there is something at the end that we didn't address in one way or another, or something that you want us to go into further, remember we are revising that document right now. So you'll be able to leave us your questions and they might make it into the next revision.
And also, as we are talking this evening, if questions do come up, please feel free to put them in the chat. The chat is going to be monitored so that we can hopefully answer some of those questions. So please, if there's a question about what we're talking about, please put it in the chat, and we will hopefully address that. All right. So, what are the recurring issues, right? Okay, so here's the very first question that we're going to talk about. How do you know if a pre-K student is a multilingual learner? In case you have your NJPSA document open, this starts on page 23. There is a whole section on preschool students because believe it or not, we had lots of discussions about preschool. This is probably the topic that we had the most discussion about. So there is a whole section on preschoolers.
Which is timely because we were doing preschool expansion.
Exactly, right? And I think everybody in this group knows that all of our students need to complete the home language survey, right? It's a little bit different for our preschoolers, however, right? Because there is no real developmentally appropriate screener or test for identifying multilingual learners at preschool level. So what ends up happening, in case you don't know it, is that when students respond to the home language survey, one of two answers is what it yields. It's not a multilingual learner or maybe a multilingual learner. So what we're required to do is at the preschool level, if the answer is maybe a preschool, we're required to identify those multilingual learners at the preschool level in our student information system. Not to test them at that point, but they need to be identified and they actually do get reported to the state as part of the enrollment report. But then because there is no official screener for preschool. That's all that happens at the preschool level, since official services don't begin until kindergarten, right? Um, Screening for students, the actual testing should happen prior to the start of kindergarten. And so most districts will probably do it late in the springtime, around May or June. They can be done in the summer, but that's a little difficult. Doing it around May or June will help districts then identify and be able to plan for students who need services in kindergarten, especially if you don't have services in every school, right? Because students will need to know where students go, how many students you have, how many sections of each grade level and proficiency level you're going to need. So
And also if they are students who have IEPs or have one in the works, then those are students that you'll need to have discussions with your special education department about their placement.
exactly, that's going to be really important. So here is that specific scenario. If you have a preschool student who has an IEP already or is in the process of being classified or being tested, right? They were tagged as a multilingual learner. So the home language survey, yes, said that maybe they're a multilingual learner. What happens when they transition into kindergarten? In your pear deck, you should have a multiple choice question, and your job is to choose the wrong answer. So go ahead and select the answer that's wrong for a preschool student who has an IEP already. What happens when they go to kindergarten? So find the tab where you've got your pear deck and answer the wrong question. And I'm going to give you a few minutes. If you just joined us, please go to joinpd.com and enter GPMDHL, and you should be able to answer that question. So it looks like we have the majority of people who have responded. So I'm going to go ahead and show the responses. And look at that.
Yeah, you can tell we're talking to experts.
Exactly. Yeah. The wrong answer is that they have to choose between ESL or special ed services. That is absolutely the wrong answer. They can receive ESL services in their special ed setting. That could be an option. And they could get pulled into an ESL class. It's an option, but it's very independent and individual depending on the students, right? So those students will need to be screened using the listening and speaking portion of the WIDA screener and not the model anymore. The model, if you didn't know, was approved only for mid-year exits. So the model may not be used for screening purposes anymore, only the screener. Um, and the results should be really reviewed in collaboration with the child study team, ESL teachers. You should really try and talk about these students, right? And figure out what it is that they actually need. A quick reminder is that state assessments include kindergartners, first graders, and second graders. Often, people don't think about our K1 and 2 students who we know we have to test with this access as being part of the state assessment, which means that any accommodations that a student may need must be in their IEP. So this is going to be critical for those preschoolers. Nobody's thinking about preschoolers having to take a state assessment, but they will in
Right.
kindergarten.
And also they should be your whoever is in charge of your student management system. Those students need to be included in your pre-ID upload as well.
Right. I'm seeing here, yeah, people think you're crazy when you mention state testing for kindergartners. It's true, right? It's true. They do have to take one. And so it's really that important, right? So that because if the accommodations are not in the IEP, we know, right? Then students cannot get those accommodations. And here's a link to the state accommodation manual. If you haven't seen it for this year, there it is. Starting on page 34 are the checklists that you can bring to the IEP meetings that tell you exactly what accommodations are available and which ones are not. Um,
And here's something else to consider because there is a process on the DOE website that talks about, deciding whether or not a student should be eligible for ESL services if they have a significant disability. And it requires some pretty nuanced decision making. And we had a fairly large district. There were, give or take about 25 ESL teachers in my district, about 1,600 MLs, and some people who were really, really expert at what they did. But even still, I didn't feel like we really had the authority and the expertise to make the decision not to provide someone with services. And if our colleague, our co-author, who is a director of special services for another school district, she always says that it never hurts to overcomply, right? That you can be faulted for undercomplying, you'll never be faulted for overcomplying. I've always said the same thing. Nobody's ever been hurt by ESL. And so, and ESL goals can be linked to IEP goals. So, there is an alternate access all the way down to kindergarten at this point. And so a student does have that opportunity to be exited formally on their merits. So we always say, and all of us were in agreement about the same thing. It's better to err on the side of over compliance than under compliance because you don't want to not provide ESL services to special education students in any kind of systemic way. And there are some cases where that has happened, and the district has been found to be at fault.
and they're linked here in case you're curious and want to read about them, right? So that is the case. You probably were not going to get into trouble if you over comply, but you definitely will if you under comply and you are not providing services to students who need them. So here's another question. Why would a student who didn't get bilingual services in pre-K get them in kindergarten?
So This would happen all the time. I would get this question a lot, and basically there are a few things that address that. The first one is the preschool guidelines, right? Where really all of our students who are multilingual learners are being supported in, in all of their languages, right? So there's not official ESL classes, there's not official bilingual education classes at that point. It's just that all of their languages are being supported. The other thing is that the language demands increase so much as you progress through the grades that most of what our preschoolers are doing for them, it's academic language, but really by the time you get into kindergarten, you're really thinking about that as more social language. The academic language takes a lot more time to acquire and is a lot more demanding. So those are some of the reasons why often it's decided that the best way for those students to master content while they are getting to a level of academic English that will allow them to be independent is to provide bilingual education.
Yeah, so that can absolutely happen. And I'm looking at a question in the chat right now about tagging students in pre-K. And it says that students in pre-K were tagged as ESL who they thought might need ESL services. Remember that we're tagging the
Mhm.
students who should be getting tagged in preschool are the ones whose home language survey yields the answer that says maybe an L. And so those students who get tagged as possibly needing services are the ones that should get tested.
They are visit, right? Yes.
They're the ones who should get tested at the in the summer or at the end of the springtime to identify if they actually need services.
Mhm. Just like we had mentioned before, is that you're casting a wide net at
Mhm.
preschool just because of the fact that you can't really screen and assess, and because we are supporting our students' language development in general. So they cast a wider net at that point, just so that we know we need to support these students in all of their languages because they have more than one, and then we refine that once we're able to do it.
One other thing I'd like to say about that process, especially with preschoolers, is we're going to really encourage you to talk about or talk with whoever is in charge of that process, right? Of identifying the students and giving the families a home language survey to ensure that the information that parents are giving us at the point of registration is correct. I know that we found that parents often misinterpreted the questions, and we can't change the questions, right? Because they're written by the state, and we're told that they must be provided as written. We can't change them. And sometimes they're misinterpreted because they can be a little confusing. So, a recommendation would be to try and have some system in place where that's verified at the point of registration, because there is now a process on the New Jersey Department of Education website where you must identify and must go through a process for students who are misidentified. And so you don't want to have to go to your superintendent and say, here's a list of all the students who were misidentified that you need to kind of verify and that we need to send to the state. So the more accurate you get at the point of entry, the better it's going to be for everybody, for the students and for the district. So you may not know of that process, but if a student is misidentified, then the district has to follow a process that includes having the superintendent be involved in providing names to the state. So I would encourage you to really think about that and have some collaboration with your registration offices so you can verify that information at the point of contact, the first point of entry.
Exactly. And I noticed that there is a question here about, can a student in elementary be pulled out for ESL services every day when they're in self-contained classes during academic blocks? Or do they need to
Hmm.
receive ESL services having the ESL teacher push in? That is going to be very individual, right? It depends on the student's IEP. They're going to have any different amount of percentage of time that they have to be with the general population. It depends on the nature of their disability. It depends on a lot of things. So that's something that really can't be answered as a blanket, and there's not code that covers that. So that's something that will be a very individual decision.
However, students, if they are eligible for ESL services, must get ESL services every day. So
Mhm.
how that happens for a student who's classified like Joanne said, will really depend on the student's needs and the student's classification, right? If their IEP says that they need to be in a special education setting for 100% of the time, then we can't pull them out. An ESL teacher probably should be going into the classroom and providing service at that time, but they should be getting ESL every day. What that looks like depends on the district, and it depends on the student's needs and their IEP, which is why, again, it's so important. A through line from today is going to be collaboration.
Communication. Mhm.
Yeah, collaboration. It's so, so important. And often when we do this workshop, just so you know, we know that most everybody here is in the field of second language acquisition. You're probably an ESL, bilingual teacher. But when we do this in districts, we usually do it with teams of administrators, child study teams, ESL teachers, bilingual teachers, and interventionists, so that everybody's hearing the same message. Because as Joanne said at the very beginning, is that we often have, these two silos. We've got all these experts in the field of second language acquisition and code for second language acquisition and ESL and bilingual. And we've got experts in child study, in special education in our child study teams and their code. And they were written separately, but our students don't live in two separate worlds, right? We've got a lot of these students who live in both of those worlds. And that's why it's so important to have that collaboration. And it is really hard at the teacher level to get that started, which is why we recommend that administrators, child study team members, everybody come to the training, because sometimes they all need to hear this. We all need to hear the same message in order to be able to kind of put systems in place where that can happen.
Right.
Oh,
And just moving, just before we move on, there's a question here about screening of students, this particular one, mostly nonverbal and autistic. And, that's a tough question because, as a WIDA state, as a member of the WIDA consortium, we only have the tools that are available to us. And so I think that there is an alternate screener at this point. If that applies, if the decision tree indicates that that would apply to that student, we would be able to use that one. But we don't have tools for every situation at our disposal. So I would stick with that it's always better, especially if we know that this is a student who's a new arrival, who is a novice English learner, regardless of ability. I would say it's always better to over comply than under comply, and then try to collect data while the student is in the program.
exactly. All right, so let's talk about what happens when a student who's a multilingual learner might need additional services. And
So
this
this
is
is these are situations from the field. These are things that have all happened. And so this scenario is one where an ESL teacher discovers that one of her fifth grade students, who's been around for about a year or so, discovers that they're classified, which is really surprising because she's never seen any indication of a disability. So she asked the classroom teacher and is told, well, it was decided that he needed extra help.
And usually at this point in the presentation, when we have special educators and child study team members, you can visibly see them cringe, right? Because that is not what special education is, right? It is not extra help. There's a whole other process. But I think sometimes this language from IDEA gets misinterpreted, right? It says in making a determination of eligibility for special education and related services, a student shall not be determined eligible if the determinant factor is due to a lack of instruction in reading or in reading, including essential components of reading instruction or math, or due to limited English proficiency. So basically, it says that a student who is just learning English doesn't have a learning disability, right?
Now, sometimes that's misinterpreted in different ways, right?
That's
And I
really it
think
is.
we saw
Or
that in the initial questions was that, it's also not something that precludes a student from being evaluated for special education services. So that's why we have in red here, if the determinant factor is either a lack of instruction, right? The student is asleep,
The brush.
or the student is just learning English.
Exactly.
And we're gonna talk a little bit more about some different ways to to sort of separate those things out.
Mhm. We want to point out a resource that would be really helpful to distribute to your administrators. It is a rubric that is found right here that kind of helps a district identify and self-evaluate their whole kind of INRS, MTSS process. It's very, very helpful. We won't have time to actually go through it right now, but we encourage you to share it with your administrators. And I am trying to get myself back to the original slideshow, and I am having trouble doing that. So I'm going to quickly stop my share and go back to it again. So give me 1 second. I am not quite sure why this is happening. And here we go. Give me 1 second. My apologies, everyone. But here we go. Here we are. Okay, so on your tab where you've got your Pear Deck, you have a multiple choice question where you're going to have to identify if this is a myth or a fact. Multilingual learners don't need to be considered for tiered interventions because they're already receiving ESL as their intervention. Is this a myth or is it a fact? So go ahead and choose your answer, myth or fact.
And while they're doing that, we had a question in the chat about the decision trees, and the last question is, does the student participate in the state alternate content assessment? If the student is in K-2, is it okay to just skip that question? And what we always tell people is to think about whether or not that student will be eligible when they reach grade 3, given the disability that they're exhibiting now.
Mhm. Yeah, so I would definitely consider that question and ask it the way that Joanne just said. If they were in third grade, would they be eligible for the DLM or not? That would be a really good question. Okay, so MLs don't need to be considered for tiered services because they're already receiving ESL. True or false? Myth. Nicely done.
Thank you.
Yes, it is a myth. And this is often something that is misunderstood by a lot of people, that ESL is a tier 1 service.
And what I always tell people is to think of French 1, right? If I were taking French 1, and this were a perfect world where everybody gets every intervention that they need, and and that's no problem. If I were in French 1, would that be a reason for me to be in interventions? And usually people kind of start laughing about that, but really it gets to the exact same point, right? How can you're not deficient in something that you've never been exposed to. Now, if you looked at me and a lot of other French 1 students that are like me, and they're progressing in French 1 like that, and I'm not, now that might be a reason to take a look at me for my French intervention. But just the fact that I'm in French 1 doesn't mean that I need interventions. French is a tier 1 service.
Exactly. And also, as far as tier services go, all students are entitled to every service that they need, right? So if they are eligible for tier 2 or tier 3 services, they should be able to get those as well, right? So
And one
that,
of the issues, one of the barriers that you encounter sometimes has to do with scheduling. So this is something we land on heavy when we are with administrators, because they're the ones usually that are making up that schedule, is that a lot of times there's a win period, an interventions and enrichment period, and they'll schedule ESL during that time. And we will always very strongly discourage districts from doing that because you're creating a schedule conflict where students have to
absolutely,
choose one or the other when really they shouldn't have to do that.
exactly. If you were ever audited, they would say that this is an adult problem that adults need to fix, right? It's a scheduling issue. So, but then how do you know who gets interventions? Well, it's all about data. It is all about data and it drives everything in the process, right? And so our job as second language acquisition specialists is to kind of contextualize what we're seeing with our students within that second language acquisition process, right? Provide explanations up front for behaviors related to second language acquisition, include language and background information.
And
Some
we have here linked, a lot of people are familiar with RITEL. This is sort of like the cliff notes of lots of different languages so that you can see whether something is a feature of the student's first language or not. And therefore, it might be just something where the first language is sort of, transposing itself upon the second.
Exactly, right? And what Joanne was alluding to here was the comparison to two peers is going to be really important because all of us in the field of ESL and bilingual have dealt with students with interrupted education, right? And so again, that language from IDEA says that a student shouldn't be classified if the determinant factor is that they haven't had the same opportunities for education as other students here in the United States have had. So having had interrupted education doesn't mean that they have a learning disability. But we all work with students who've had interrupted education, and we know that once we start teaching students, especially older students, they start growing like crazy because usually they are at a more cognitively advanced level, right? If you have students who just were never in school and they come in as a 13, 14, or 15-year-old, they don't need an entire year to learn letters and sounds like kindergartners do, right? They can do that pretty quickly. And so they usually grow really fast. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that true comparison to tiers. But we want to show you this sample of an interventions data chart because the most important thing you can do is collect data that is specific and that shows the results. So this is not a model, it's a sample. You have to really identify the concern. So what is it?
Julie, can you zoom in a little bit more?
Yes. Can you need to really identify what is the area of concern and then match up a strategy that addresses that area of concern. Show on your chart when and how often you used the strategy, and then what was the outcome, right? This is going to speak volumes. This was done for a student in kindergarten. You can see the areas of concern, the exact strategies that the teacher used, how long they were used, and what the results were. That's going to be really, really important because we also know working with our students that sometimes we just know, right? We just know that something is going on. There's probably a learning disability here.
And then you take it, you take it to your team and they kick it back and say it's language. And now not only is this kid not getting what maybe they need, but now you're mad about it too. So we're going to try to figure out some ways to sort of, make those processes work more efficiently so that kids do get what they need right when they need it.
Exactly.
And so if you're considering a change of tiers, right, going from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3, a couple of critical questions for you to ask, right? Have they had the opportunity to learn, both in terms of time and quality of instruction, right? Has it been 6 months of high quality, education, or has there been a series of short-term subs in the room? So those are some things that are important that sometimes we don't think about. Did the previous tier of instruction reflect integrated English language development? Is it culturally sustaining? Is it being implemented well? Is it culturally relevant and respectful? And how do we determine fidelity of implementation? So all of those things are really important, whether we're moving from tier 1 to tier 2 or tier 2 to tier 3.
So, the $1 million question. Is it a difference or is it a disability? How do we know? So there's a whole section in this document starting on page 11. So let's dig into this a little bit. Here's another scenario. And you might have encountered this. A second grade teacher requests that a student be screened for ESL services because a student is reading at a B level. The student isn't reading at grade level, right? So the teacher is concerned. However, this student was screened at the end of preschool and they didn't qualify for ESL or bilingual services. but they're having difficulty. So now they're like, yeah, can you check and see if maybe they need ESL? I'm sure this has happened to some of you
Never.
in the webinar, right? So what are the next steps and what additional information is needed? Well, first of all, we know that a student cannot be rescreened. If a student was screened in preschool and was found not to be eligible for ESL services, they don't magically become a multilingual learner now in second grade unless they were gone for those 2 years, right? Maybe they were gone and went back to their home country and then came back. That's different. But once a student is screened and is found not to be eligible, then we cannot rescreen that student for services. So, like I said, they don't magically become a multilingual learner. So that means that probably something else is going on, right? And you can see that there's a little chart over here that's kind of talking about true peers. So we're going back to this idea of comparing how the student is doing compared to other students like that. How is a student doing compared to their siblings? Do the parents have concerns? This is where we now need to start looking a little bit outside of second language. So this is something that a lot of people don't realize outside of our field is that once a student has been screened, we can't rescreen them unless, something like they've gone back for a significant amount of time. But that's going to be really, really important for us to consider.
And when we're talking about true peers, we're not talking about three students from Mexico, right?
Yes.
Because you could have one student from a rural area where, they were in school whenever it was not raining and the school was inaccessible. You could have someone who went to a private school in a major city and is on par, if not higher, than the students you have in, your native English speakers who've been there all their lives. So you really have to get students who are as similar demographically, socioeconomically, educationally, as you possibly can. And if they don't even necessarily all need to be from the same country, and we're going to see an example of that.
We are. But before we get there, we're going to talk about some observable difficulties, right? So these are just examples of some difficulties we might see in students. And in a moment, we're going to put you in a breakout room. It's the only breakout group we're going to have. You'll be together with a group for maybe just 3 or 4 minutes to have a very quick discussion. This is what you're going to do. You're going to pick one of these observable difficulties, like a student omits words or adds words to a sentence. We've seen this with students, right? Or they have difficulty retelling the events of a story read aloud, or they become distracted. You pick one, doesn't matter which one. And what we'd like for you to do in your breakout group is to talk about the reason. What could be the reason for a student omitting words or adding words to a sentence? What could be the reason for a student having difficulty retelling the events of a story read aloud? Or what could be the reason for a student becoming distracted easily? So pick one of these, have a quick conversation about what could be causing this observable difficulty. And then we're going to come back together. All right. So when you are in your groups, you're going to have a quick discussion and just pick one and talk about what might be causing this observable difficulty. All right. So you should have a screen that says join your group. So please go ahead and join your. Okay. All
Welcome
right.
back.
Yes. Welcome back, everybody, from your breakout groups. Hope you had a productive discussion. But we wanted you to talk about it and kind of consider this, which we're hoping that you did, is that it depends on what perspective you took, what answer you were going to come up with, right? So a student can omit a word or add words to a sentence if you're looking at it from the perspectives of second language acquisition, which all of you have, right? It could be direct transfer from primary language or the early stages of second language acquisition, right? If it's a student who's a newcomer, we're definitely going to see some influence. Joanne had sometime
Ah, yes,
a request.
I got a call one day. They wanted to refer a child for speech. They were dropping their articles, which, as a reminder, is words like and the. And the student was Ukrainian. So students who, who are speakers of Ukrainian, routinely drop their articles because Ukrainian doesn't have them. And so, yeah, this student was not a candidate for speech, at least not for that reason.
Exactly, right? And this is one of the reasons why we have this conversation with a lot of teams who come to our training is that US second language acquisition specialists know a lot of this information. However, you may not know everything about every student who comes from every country or every language. So that link that was in a prior slide that takes you to RITEL, the Rhode Island Teachers of English Language Learners, there is the Language and Country Projects which takes you to this slide, if you haven't seen it, that organizes languages by countries and continents. So I'm going to go to Africa and I'm going to go to America, just choose one, but they have it for all of the languages. They have a slide deck that tells you a little bit about the language, about where it's spoken, the history, the writing system, and
Issues it may cause for an English learner.
look at that, the
I mean,
communication.
seriously, this is Cliff Notes.
It absolutely is. So especially for those little incidence language groups, this is an incredible resource right at your fingertips, right? And if that person had looked at this, probably would have found out that Ukrainian doesn't have articles and that referral would have probably not happened, right? Because it was a very normal expectation for a student whose first language was Ukrainian. But if you look at it through the lens of special education, if that's your background, well, it could be word retrieval difficulties. It could be an expressive language difficulty, right? So this could be an issue. And this really exemplifies the need for all of us to be at the table. So I know that one of the questions at the very beginning was that how do you get invited to the table? We're spreading the word, right? And the best thing we can do is to continue talking to your administrators about this because without your expertise at the table, things like that are exactly what's going to happen.
And as I used to have an HR director who used to say, you only need to listen to me if you want to be right.
Right? So all of these observable difficulties have a different reason behind them, depending on your perspective. If you're not familiar with the ELL toolkit, it's linked right here where it says examples in chapter 6. It will take you to the ELL toolkit. Darn it.
We have to fix the link.
We have to fix the link, which has been
I
moved.
will fix the link now, and then if you downloaded it, you can just refresh. I'll let you know when it's ready.
And it
Because, yeah, a few things have moved around.
It won't refresh because you're in a Pear Deck, but when you get the bit.ly at the end, the link will be corrected.
Yes.
But the ELL Toolkit Chapter 6 has a bunch of these charts organized by observable difficulties in writing, in sentence construction, in verbal expression, all of these different things. So it's an invaluable resource when you see these difficulties with your students, and something to bring to the table to your child study teams as well. All right, so we're going to move on to another scenario. And this actually happened in Franklin. There's teachers here who probably remember this student, a 19-year-old who was a recent entry from the Dominican Republic, who was unable to read or write in Spanish, and she was blind. She hadn't been in school since first grade because they couldn't accommodate her visual impairment in the school that she had access to. So, what would you do with a student like this? The answer is that in a situation like this that we call a screaming red flag, we don't wait, right? There are definite rules and regulations that our counterparts and colleagues in special education must follow. One of those rules is this 90 day process, right? That has to happen and that it takes a little bit of time. But in a situation like this, we can't wait. How is a student going to move around a building, right? So we immediately called the Commission for the Blind. I immediately called my colleague in special education so we could get a move on this. And again, you're not usually as a district going to get in trouble for over servicing a student. But imagine what would happen if we didn't do anything for this student who is blind and unable to move through a building by herself.
And
So,
then also you have the issue of whether or not that student, because a lot of people get hung up on the fact that the student is 19.
yes,
And can the student be enrolled in high school? The answer is yes. So I want to just direct your attention to, first of all, the link that says case law. That is the actual text of the administrative law decision. It actually comes from Somerville, 2009. And it was the case of a student from Venezuela, I think, who actually had a high school diploma in Venezuela and went to register in the district, and the district turned her away. And it went to court, and they said, yes, as a matter of fact, unless you can prove that the degree from another country meant all of the NJSLS required for graduation, you must admit them. So whenever we would have a situation like that, I would say to the registration folks and whoever else was asking, would you like to evaluate the transcript and ensure that every single course that they took is fully aligned to and meets the requirements with the NJSLS? Because I don't have time for that. Just admit them, right? And they did. And then there's an article that actually came from the 74 and it won a major journalism award. And this was Joe Napolitano does a lot of reporting on education. And it was she called a bunch of districts all over the country, said that she had a student that she was registering. He was 19 or something like that. And a surprising number of them, even in New Jersey, turned them away. And this actually was this article was the impetus for a lot of districts changing their policies.
exactly. So let's talk a little bit. I'm taking a look at our time, and I know that we don't have much time left, and we really do want to leave some time for questions. So we want to try and speed this along a little bit. But the whole referral and testing process starts on page 14 of the document. And this is another scenario that actually happened with a sixth grader.
Mm-hmm. And this was a student from Vietnam who would, go into the cafeteria, eat his lunch really quickly, and leave, right? Go run and hide in the boys' room. They had this district had a peer, a peer buddy, a buddy program where they would pair a student up with a student from the same language and cultural background who kind of knew the ropes. And that student came over and said, yeah, there's something really strange about this kid. And so the ESL teacher was asked about it, and she said, well, doesn't really matter because we can't do anything until he's been here for 3 years.
So this leads to this question on your Pear Deck. A multilingual learner should not be referred to the child study team or should only be referred after a period of time. Myth or fact? So go ahead and answer in the Pear Deck. Is this a myth or is it a fact? Give it about 5 more seconds. And we have most myth and some facts. Really interesting. In this particular case, this is a myth. And it is a myth that keeps on living. We find it everywhere across the state. Across the state. Joanne and I travel everywhere. And it's a very
It
persistent.
just won't die.
It just won't die, right? So here is some language from the Dear Colleague letter. District policies of delaying referral and evaluation based on EL status are impermissible under the IEDEA and civil rights laws.
And I want to point out something about the Dear Colleague letter, right? Because most of us know that it's been rescinded, right? However, all a Dear Colleague letter does is direct us to the laws, and it tells us how a particular administration chooses to address them. Well, this administration has a different point of view than previous administrations. However, they have not changed any of the laws. The laws still apply. And that Dear Colleague letter really is a nice compendium of best practices. So we still lean on it because of those reasons.
And there is a link here to a Legal One podcast that you might want to listen to at some point. It's about 30 minutes long. It is a conversation with the David Nash, who's the head of the legal department at NJPSA, and Joanne, actually. And he does a really wonderful job explaining what the difference is between a dear
A law, an executive order, a dear colleague letter, all these legal mumbo jumbo that we depend on, but we don't always 100% understand. And Dave is the legal education director there. And if you've ever, heard him, he's marvelous. He's very clear. And, I just talk a lot. So the two of us together, we kind of made a good pair.
Yes, he
It's
did.
about a half an hour or so. So if you commute, it's worth a little bit listen on the commute.
Exactly. So here's just another thing. No such thing as double dipping, right?
Yes.
Going back to that idea that if a student is eligible for services, they should get those services.
And I just love Seinfeld. He's contributed so much to the English language. In fact, now we're in the season of regifting, and the whole concept of regifting actually originated with Seinfeld as well.
Right? So this is something that is really very, very important for all our students. They shouldn't have to choose between ESL and intervention, right? Or ESL and special education. They should get all of those services. We do want to show you something. We're not going to have time to go through this whole case study, but we do want to show you a couple of resources that might be really helpful. This is a case study of a middle school student that we're calling Mehmet, who was from Turkey, and he was a newcomer, a level 1, and there were a lot of concerns. There might be people here, if you're from Franklin, who might remember this student. That is not his name, though, Mehmet. I changed the name. And he was having a lot of difficulty in the classroom. He needed translations for all of the directions. He had delayed processing even when translations were provided. He had limited expression in both languages. His father actually was very vocal in saying that he needed some help, that he was concerned about his child. He had a very slow rate of growth in English, and he was showing a lot of difficulty in the classroom. We want to show you a sample referral form that the team at the middle school started to create. And again, it's a sample, not a model, but we really want you to see it because it has a lot of incredible and really wonderful information from the perspective of an ESL teacher. And this was a referral form to the child study team, and it isn't completed. They were working on it. But here the math teacher wrote some information on how he's doing, provided some data on how he did on the IXL assessment, noted that he was at a 3rd grade level. Then he only increased by 10 points, and then he decreased. So that was really telling. And here's what the ESL teacher wrote. And this is what we want you to pay attention to. The kind of information that you can bring to the table should be specific to your area of expertise, right? So this teacher provided the model, which was used for eligibility when it was allowable. So he was a level 1 in all domains. Said a little bit about his family background, that he lives with both his parents, but Mehmet's father came before Mehmet did and then brought him over. He had been in school in Turkey, and they said Mehmet is a slightly different child. He has a bit of a dyslexia problem. This is what the father said. And so they had concerns about his education in Turkey. She gave us a little bit of information about Turkish and pointed out all the difficulties. And here's the comparison to the like peers that I'd like to show you. He was the only student who was from Turkey. So how do you compare a student to like peers when you only have one student from the same country? Well, we identified a group with as many like and commonalities. We chose a group that were all level 1s. They had all started as a level 1. They had all been in school before coming here. They were all new to the country and started at about the same time. None had behavior issues, and they all seek help and came to office hours. So these were as many commonalities as we could pull. And then she provided the information that was important for the student. You can see here that student A, listening, speaking, reading, and writing at the end of unit assessment 1, end of unit assessment 2, and end of unit assessment 3, you can see that there's growth from 1 to 2 to almost to some level 3s. Student B also moved from level 1, wasn't there for end of unit 2, but then there was some 2s and 3s. Student C also showed some growth from ones to twos and threes. And look at where Mehmet is. This is significant data, right? When you're comparing students to like peers. The most of his students who are like him are progressing like this, and Mehmet was progressing like that. This is significant data, right? A significant point of information. You can see over here that there's some OG data because this teacher happened to be an OG trained teacher. So she
Orton Gillingham.
Yes, or in Gillingham. So you can see there's a lot of information here that, again, we want you to take a look at that you can bring to the table as a second language acquisition specialist to get, kind of fill in those questions. Is this really about second language? Oh, maybe you're just seeing this because it's an interrupted education. Very clearly here, she's demonstrating that it has nothing to do with that, right? When she's comparing the student to his like peers.
And another important piece of information is that those concerns are there in Turkish as well. So, whether something is translated into Turkish, if instructions are given in Turkish, even at home, right? Mehmet's parents have concerns. So that's another real data point, because if something is only showing up in English, you can be fairly certain that it's something related to language acquisition. If it's showing up in both, that's another story.
Exactly, right? And here's the importance of data again, right? It's all about data. And not, we know in our heart of hearts that something's going on with Mehmet. Here's the data that shows what's going on. So it drives everything. Oral language and speaking samples are really important. Difficulty observed, comparison to like peers, all of this we've talked about, and really contextualize it in that lens that in second language acquisition process.
Right. Lean on that expertise because you're the only one who has it.
Exactly, right? Exactly. So here's another myth or fact. If a case is not progressing as hoped, or if there are internal barriers to providing services, asking the parent to write a letter will expedite the process.
And you know what? Let's flip to the answer because
We
we
don't
want to
have
get
a
to
lot
other
of time.
questions. It
Here
is a myth.
is a myth. Definitely parents have a right to know their rights, and we should take every opportunity to educate them on the process. However, we have to respect the process of special education, right? There is a process in place for a reason, and we can't advise parents we can't advise parents to do anything, a particular decision, right? To make a particular decision. What we can do is give them as much information and tell them what their rights are. Be mindful that a letter that a parent writes is not going to expedite anything. It's not going to get a student classified. The only thing that a letter will do is activate an initial identification meeting where they're going to ask, is there sufficient data that tells us there might be a learning disability? And if the answer is no, that's the end of the meeting.
Right.
That
And
is
knowing in our heart of hearts that something's wrong is not data.
Exactly. So that's why we're leaning so heavily on data, right? Because that is what the child study team is going to be asking for. So we have to be responsible enough to bring that to the table through our lens of second language acquisition. That's our area of expertise, right? So let's bring the data to the table and also respect the process. Know that there is a very, very specific process that they need to follow. And then so learning about it is the only way that we're going to kind of move forward in the process of getting students what they need by working together, right? And having those areas of expertise be helpful. So
And also on the flip side of that is I used to sometimes get letters, and I lean on this very heavily when I'm with child study team members and all those folks, is that I would sometimes get letters refusing ESL services because the child study team knew in their heart of hearts that this student didn't need ESL. That doesn't work either, right? And we also, right, because I was the only one who could exit a student. Child study team couldn't do that. And we always want to be very, very careful not to tell a parent what to do. I can think of one particular instance where I walked in, I had a stack of refusal letters sitting on my desk waiting for me, and they all came from two classrooms and they had all had child study team meetings 2 days before. So I start picking up the phone calling parents, and invariably I was getting the response, well, I didn't really want to, but they told me I had to write a letter. And I
Yikes.
went straight to the special ed director and just, unloaded. Because we cannot tell a parent what to do. I mean, think of the power differential, first of all. And we don't want to be seen as coercing or manipulating our parents in order to get what we want, think is right, whatever. It doesn't matter. We can't tell a parent what to do. We can present a parent with all the evidence and let them make a decision, but we can't tell them what to do.
Mhm. And often, when I had those conversations with parents, very different results happened, right? I would sit with a parent to review the data with them, and some parents would say, "Oh, my child loves ESL. I want him to have every resource possible. I want him to stay." And another parent would say, "If I refuse services, will they go back to their home school?" That was what was important, right? And in other instances, parents were like, Yeah, no, my child has been here since, they were 4 and they're in high school. They don't need ESL services anymore." So each parent was able to make their own decision, and that's really, really important. You never want to be in a situation where you might be accused of coercing a parent into a decision. So leave that to your supervisors. A couple of resources that are really important here. There's a sample PLAF outline from NJDOE. This Padlet is from NJDOE. If you click on it, it will take you to a Padlet um, from a series of workshops that were done on multilingual learners with disabilities. So there's lots of resources. Here's a sample PLAF of what it might look like. Once again, it is a sample. This comes from that Padlet. So a lot of resources here. And we are going to skip case study 2 of Juan Manuel, but we are going to just let you know that there is a referral form, again, a sample referral form for another student. So you can get to see another sample of what a referral form might look like for somebody else, right? Where in ESL, the teacher provided a lot of information, very specific to second language acquisition. The teacher did compare the student to other peers here. And something also really important. Um, so you can take a look at this. I'm really conscious of the time and I don't want to keep you way too long. But we also want to talk about accommodations because this question gets asked a lot about the less than 4 domains that we can exempt students from a domain. There is a decision tree, right, in the accommodation manual. Um, and so please use that and bring that
Mhm.
to your child study teams and don't make that decision alone.
Right.
Don't make that decision alone.
Well, it has to be in the IEP, right? In order to use the less than 4 domains exemption, they have to actually be classified. It has to be in the IEP, and it can't be done retroactively. So
Right.
for example, in this scenario, the test has already come back and the guidance counselor wants to know if they can be exited, if they can be exempted retroactively. The answer is no.
They can't, right? They cannot be exempted retroactively, but it is possible to exempt students. And just as a point of reference, when I left Franklin, we had about 850 multilingual learners, and we had about 4 students who were exempted from a domain.
Yeah.
So it's
And I had about 1,600 and we had about 10 or 12 that
Mhm,
were exempted.
mhm.
So it's definitely not something you're going to use a lot. I did have a principal call me one time and say, "Can we just exempt everyone from the reading domain who's low?"
No.
No, we cannot do that, right? It's really, I mean, I used it for example, a student who was deaf mute got exempted from the listening and speaking. It's really for those students who just cannot access it any other way.
Exactly. And we had the same kind of exemption. We had the exemption for a middle school student who was just learning letters and sounds. Somebody was asking about that, right? And so there's no way that any accommodation would allow them to have access or to access the reading section of the access, so they were exempted from that. We had a second grader, I believe, who had such a severe speech impediment that he was unintelligible, so he was exempted from that. So it's very few students.
Mhm. And this one we've already actually addressed. Look at
Yes.
us.
We've already addressed it. The other thing to know is that there is an alternate screener. I know we mentioned it, but there is a decision tree in the new accessibility and accommodations manual. So pay attention to that for, for the new screener that is available. And I think you already talked about this, right? About exiting
Mhm.
students from ESL.
Right. And just a point, and you already know this, I always make sure I stress this with non-ESL bilingual people that, a parental refusal doesn't mean they're no longer an ML. It means that they are an ML whose parent refused services, right? And they still need to take the access, and we're still responsible for them.
Exactly, right? Here's some information about parental access, right? And interpreting and translating. This also comes from the Dear Colleague letter, and it kind
As
of
well as New Jersey Administrative Code, right? Don't rely on the sibling, don't rely on the friend, don't pull a janitor in to be the interpreter in that meeting, right? That it really needs to be someone who is able to do that job.
Mhm. Right? And so these are the reasons why districts had gotten into trouble with regard to interpreting and translating for all of those situations that Joanne just mentioned, or even failing to identify what they still call LEP parents. Even if a student isn't a multilingual learner, but their parents are, right? They need to have information translated.
And did you know there's an app for that? And it is still there. You can find it on the App Store, at least if you look under EL Family Toolkit. You can still download it. I'm sure they're not updating it at this point, but this is the Family Toolkit. And it comes in, there's 5 different languages that parents can choose from. And it's really great as a conversation starter and as a quick way that they can know their rights, especially with respect to special education.
Absolutely. So for this, I think we're gonna say the same thing that you guys already know, right? Is that collaboration is really, really important. I'm just looking at our time
Yep.
and
And a lot of times ESL professionals are decentered a little bit, but you are professionals. No one can make you feel inferior without your permission. And just go push yourself in, right? What's the worst they're going to do to you?
exactly.
Unless you're non-tenured, then don't do that. But yes.
Right? But our students are going to do better when we are all working for their benefit. The last section just has a lot of resources that are linked. So that NJDOE Padlet, the document, the toolkit, which we will double check again. Aha, there it is. But we'll make sure that the links are
It's
all
already done.
oh wonderful, are corrected. Um, and there's a lot of resources at the end of this. And we would really, I know we don't have a ton of time, but I'm happy, Michelle and Kathy, to spend a couple of minutes answering questions. If you'd like to stay for a few more minutes, we would be happy to do that. But before we do that, we do want to ask you to please fill out this Google form for us. If you click on that image of a Google form, it will take you to a quick survey to give us some feedback on tonight.
And if you have not done so, because the minute that we close out of here, your Pear Deck will go away. And if you only have the slides through the Pear Deck, your slides will go away. So please open up another browser tab and, copy and paste that bit.ly into the
Verify.
browser tab.
Yo, yo.
I will be sending this bit.ly out to everyone who registered, so you'll also get it there. If you would like a PD certificate, you have to fill out NJTESOL-NJBE's PD certificate. I'm putting that in the chat right now.
So
But we would love to know. And remember also that if you feel like there's something that we really didn't get into
yeah,
as much as you would like, if you feel like there's a stone left unturned somewhere, add that to your comments in this survey because we're going to be using this when we go back to the table in January is our next meeting to continue with the revision of this document and we'll see what we can put in there.
mhm. Like I said, I'm happy to stay for a couple of minutes if people have
Mhm.
questions that we're happy to to answer them and stay for a couple more minutes. But thank you for spending an evening with us in this really crazy busy time. It was really good to see a lot of familiar names and faces. And if we don't see you, we hope you have a wonderful holiday season and a fantastic 2026. Thank you for joining
Absolutely.
us.
Thank you so much.
Oh, hi, Delphina.
Hi, Delphina.
And I saw Julie. Hi, Julie. So I saw you. I don't know if you're still here.
Hi, I'm still here. Hi,
Hi,
how are
And
you?
iPhone.
I saw
Hello,
you.
iPhone.
I'll see you on Thursday too.
Yes,
So
I will.
have a good one.
Thank you. You too. And
Take
if
care.
anybody has any questions, we're happy to stay. So if anybody had a burning question that didn't get answered, please let us know.
Hi, I have a question.
Yes.
So when talking about exempting domains for students with IEPs, if I have a student who's diagnosed as communication impaired, would that qualify them for exempting the speaking portion of the WIDA?
It
It
could.
depends. It depends.
It's going to depend on, it depends on the student. It depends on the disability and the degree of the disability. If this is something that there's really no way that the student is going to be able to, navigate this test with any accommodation, then it might be worth doing.
And here's the decision tree. It's in that accessibility manual, right? And I would actually have this conversation with their case manager, with somebody else, right? So does the student have a disability? Yes. Evaluate each domain separately. Is a student able to access the content in the language domain? And if the answer is no, will available accommodations help that student? And if the answer is no, then it might be an appropriate an appropriate exemption.
Right. So they kind of walk you through the whole process of deciding if this is worth it or if it isn't, right? If the student might be eligible or where it isn't. We've got a couple of questions in the chat.
And
What guidance
Alyssa,
or data?
unfortunately, it's not a yes or no. It's always it depends.
It's always and it depends when, especially when it comes to these doubly special students, as some folks say. What guidance or data do we use to determine when ML students receive basic skills services?
So that's a district decision, but that's a
Mhm.
really good question, right? Because it's really important that the data that's being used is inclusive and considers the needs of multilingual learners.
Right.
For example, we were in a district not too long ago, a week or two ago, where the students were at the high school level, and the process and the procedure was that if a student didn't pass the NJGPA, they were put into remedial courses, period. That was the intervention, right? So a student was a multilingual learner from Ukraine who actually was a very, very he was
Advanced, right?
very advanced, but he didn't pass NJGPA because he was a newcomer. He doesn't have sufficient English yet. So he was placed in remedial courses and the student dropped out.
Right.
This was all about not having the appropriate data, right? It was very
So
rigid, very, very rigid, and didn't take into consideration the needs of multilingual learners and the fact that they won't show proficiency on a test like that until they have English proficiency.
So I would go back to that French one example, as silly as that is, and taking a look at the true peers, right? How are students that are of that proficiency level, how are they progressing, right? And if there are students who aren't progressing as would be expected, then that would be a data point that would be included in thinking about tier placement. And we
Yeah.
have another question here about when it's decided that they might be eligible for exemption. What's the process for going about this? Well, the first thing is that you would need to open up the IEP, right? Revise the IEP because this needs to be included there. And
The
once
IEP
it
needs to
is,
be amended. Yeah.
once it is, then that would be encoded in DRC.
And now is the time to do it before access actually starts, because
Mhm.
amending an IEP does take some time. I hope that helps, Katie.
Anything else?
Good, thank you. And somebody asked, where can we see the accessibility menu? The accessibility and accommodations manual, it's this one that says 2020, 25, 26. It has the yellow background. And if you click on that, it takes you straight to the accommodations manual. And I'll make sure that it's linked everywhere else. I did see the accommodations manual in the presentation that was like last year's in there, so we need to rectify that.
But you do have it.
You do have it.
Click the yellow one.
Exactly. Click the yellow one. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
anything that you feel needs to be included in there, please don't hesitate to put it in that survey. And please share this document with your teams, with your administrators, with anybody else that will listen. Give it out in, as holiday gifts. It's we want as many eyes on it as possible.
I have one last question as you were
Yeah.
saying that, and I was thinking of the myths and the facts. And I know that sometimes child study teams shy away from the communication impairment versus a specific learning disability. And so, is that something that you have like dealt with in the process of the manual for guidance?
I don't know that we've been in that we've done that in detail. So would you
Okay,
include that in the survey? Because I think that is a
you
really,
got it.
really important thing. And I don't know
Okay,
that we really went into that a lot.
There is
thank
a
you so
WIDA,
much.
there's a WIDA focus bulletin, this one, that is about students with specific learning disabilities. It doesn't talk
Okay.
communication impaired, but it does talk, this is not the one I think I was looking at. I was looking for another one. There's one that talks specifically, I thought about SLDs. I'm gonna have to find it, and maybe
We'll
maybe
give it to Kathy.
yeah, we'll give it to Kathy, because
Okay,
there is
great.
a focus bulletin I think it's specifically about one particular um disability, and I can't remember which
Okay.
one.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Take care.
You're very welcome.
Anything like that, please put it in the survey because we
You got
really
it.
want to make sure that we're
Oh,
responsive to what the needs are.
it
You
is
got it.
it is this WIDA focus. This one is about multilingual learners with SLD, specific learning disability.
Okay.
Yeah,
It is
that's the one.
absolutely.
And
Okay, great.
we got some more questions here. Did you say the model screener cannot be used for intake screening? Yes, that is that's the NJDOE. That's something that they changed this year.
Yes.
So you do want to be mindful of that.
Yes, the only allowable tool for testing students is the screener now, not the model.
And how do you work around scheduling ESL services when student is receiving all services, speech, resource, etc., and you don't want to stay there until 10 o'clock at night? That's a fair question, isn't it? This is when you get creative, right? This is when, you might see if you can satisfy multiple demands at the same time. It's difficult to like kind of give rules with that because every student is, they're snowflakes at that point. Each one of them is a little bit different. But sometimes when if you can find someone who's dual certified, for example, who can push in and kind of help to, meet some needs, that might be a way that you can do it. Let's see, can the model still be used to exit students? Yes.
Yes.
It can be used for exit, it can be used for progress monitoring.
The other thing that I was going to say about that question that you just answered, Joanne, about
That I sort of answered?
no, yeah, about scheduling is
Yes.
that I'm not sure, Vanessa, what your role is, if you're an ESL teacher or what your role is. But this is definitely something that I would give to your administrators, because
Mm-hmm.
whoever does the scheduling needs to be aware of this. So it's an issue that they need to kind of grapple with when they're creating the schedule, right? It's impossible to deal with it after the schedule is created, and then you're tasked with finding places for all of this.
They make the big bucks, let them deal with it.
Exactly. It's an administrator's responsibility to help you out with that.
Burden. Yes.
Yeah,
So the issue is that the student, well, there are multiple students who are getting pulled everywhere. They're barely in the general education class because they're getting pulled for speech, OT, resource, everything. And unfortunately, with the schedule, it is not working. Either they're missing out on something because they're with me, or they're missing out on ESL because they're with speech, and it's very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that, is sort of an answer to that, and again, that has to happen above your level, is curricular alignment. Right. So for example, if you're pulling out of English language arts, you want to make sure that your ESL program is aligned not just to the WIDA standards, but also to the SLS for language arts, right? And that you're doing things, you're addressing the standards more or less at the same time. It might be done at a level that is more appropriate to your students. So if if they're doing cause and effect in literature, yours might be doing cause and effect in the form of a lab report so that you can get in the WIDA language of science, right? But you're still doing the same standards. And that sort of alleviates that worry that students are, not getting something because they're with you. And yes, let's see. I know some folks do their own schedules, and so, once pushed into my pull-out class. Wow, that's multitasking, isn't it? Definitely what I would do is I would just pull an administrator into that conversation to help facilitate that, because they may be able to think about and facilitate things that you didn't think about, right? Or that you wouldn't have access to or wouldn't know. So just
Or
bring them
authority,
in.
or
Let
even
them,
or even authority to change, right? Because an administrator may say, "Oh, well, if we change this person's schedule, then we can fix it," and you can't really change somebody else's schedule. So bring them
yeah,
in.
your union frowns on that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, bring them into it. Let them worry about it. They're paid for that. And, sometimes, I mean, like I used to have situations where somebody finally came to me in tears 6 months after, like, the problem had been festering, and I solved it in 5 minutes,
Yeah.
right? Because I had the resources to do that, and they didn't, but they suffered for 6 months. So, don't be afraid to go to your admin and say, we need a little bit of, can you look at this with us?
Yeah.
Because we
Sounds
want to make
good.
sure that we're doing the right thing for kids, right? That's what we all get up in the morning to do.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Of
You're
course.
welcome.
Having speech push into a pull-out class, wow, that's
That's incredible.
that's a new one for me. Yeah.
So we have about 28 people still in the meeting here. Don't know
All
if there's
right,
any.
I'm stopping the share.
Yeah.
I'm stopping the share and just putting out there, does anybody have any final questions before we kind of close for the evening? I don't see any coming up.
Well, if you have something after the fact, you have our email addresses there. We're always happy to respond if you've got a question. And thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here. We know you have a lot of demands on your time right now, and we're just so glad you came.
Absolutely. Have a wonderful
And this
holiday.
document makes a great stocking stuffer.
Thank you, Joanne and Julie. We really appreciate you doing this for us. And it's just such great information. So thank you.
Our
Yeah.
pleasure. Thank you very much. And really have a wonderful holiday season, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Happy holidays. Thank you.
Thank you so much.